put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. Over 1 million of you Israelites fled from the land of Israel into the land of Africa, running away from the Romans, because the Romans was coming to put slaughter to the Israelites. The ones that didn't take heed to the prophecy of Christ, when he said you better leave and go to the mountains, go to Africa, when they got caught by the Romans, they were taken back to Europe and sold in slavery and put in servitude and became gladiators, put in the lions' dens. The pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately. Both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population without mercy. As a result of this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to other areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction. This was to the region of the south, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Grazel says, such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes, toughened by a fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, black, which it is said still makes them approximate very closely the original Jewish population of Palestine. And after migrating from Israel and dwelling on the northwestern parts of Africa, after you were fighting vigorously with the Romans, you had no choice but to start migrating to the southern regions of Africa, where the Romans didn't have any jurisdiction. Because the Romans were relentless and they were adamant about putting all Israelites to death. So in order to get any type of peace, the Israelites had to start migrating to the sub-Sahara parts of Africa. The scholars know this for a fact. The biblical scholars know this for a fact. They know all the history of the Israelites and their migration patterns. Whatever may be thought of the more or less mythological traditions connected with the earliest Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, Jewish at least in faith, and perhaps too in origin, long held sway south of the Sahara. In later centuries, Jews are believed to have settled in Western Africa during the height of the Songhai, Mali, Ghana, and Kanem-Bornu empires. According to accounts from explorers of the region, several powerful Jewish families of the Songhai Empire were of Jewish origin. Some accounts place West African Jewish communities in the Andu Forest of Dahomey, south of Timbuktu. In the 1930s, these groups still maintained a Torah scroll written in Aramaic that had been burned into parchment with a hot iron instead of ink so it could not be changed. In the 1930s, the historians went over there and still found Israelites over there that didn't get captured in the slave trade, still practicing the Hebraic faith, still knowing who they were. With a Torah, which is the first 5 books of Moses, written in Aramaic. That's the ancient language. And it's a shame that they have to burn it in hot iron so the European colonialists don't come over there tampering with it and taking the evidence and trying to hide the history. It's a shame that they have to do that. It is a total shame that they have to do that. The black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Ghanaian states were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leather workers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmith, agriculturalists, etc. Who told you that you was a bunch of Negroes running around on the west coast of Africa butt naked swinging from vines? Who told you that lie? You were and still are a prestigious people, a skillful people. The decline of Jewish communities of the West African Maghreb most likely began with the influx of Arab invaders into North Africa starting in 640 CE and later into West Africa in the 1300s and 14 CE. So after you had established communities and empires on the west coast of Africa, after the 7th century, that's when Muhammad and his band of thugs came down there to the west coast with the Quran in one hand and a sword in another one. And they were forcibly converting the Israelites into that nonsense Islam. Yeah, I said it, nonsense Islam, because that's not what we were dealing with. That's the Arabs' religion. That's not what we were dealing with. And that was the decline of the Hebraic community over there in the west coast of Africa. And that was the forefront in the beginning of the slave trade. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Tyre, Zidon, and the coast of Palestine, those are all ancient Africans that God is referring to. Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. Because ye have taken my silver and my gold, and carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians. The Africans got together with the so-called Grecians or the Europeans, and they commenced in selling the Israelites that were dwelling on the west coast of Africa in slavery. There's your slave trade right there in the Bible. Both buyers, Europeans, and sellers, Africans, saw the people traded into captivity on the African coast as outsiders. Now, why did those Africans see you as outsiders? Because you were some people that migrated and encroached on their land. They knew you were not the same exact people. The customs that you had, the way you moved, they knew you were not the same people, so they had no problem commencing in a slave trade with the Europeans. Do you be crazy to believe that Africans were selling their own people? That makes no sense at all. When the Europeans put that in the textbooks, they're using technicalities, saying Africans sold other Africans. When they're using technicalities, what they mean to say is native Africans were selling Israelites that were living in Africa. It'd be no different if somebody wrote history of 500 years from now and say there was a slave trade that happened here in America. Say black people got together and start selling white people to the Chinese. If somebody with the same mindset that the Europeans have wrote history 500 years from now, they would say Americans were selling other Americans to the Chinese. When it's two totally different nation of people living in America. You can't just say Americans sold other Americans. Two totally different people. It's the same exact scenario on the west coast of Africa. There are both oral and written explanations that trace the origin of the Igbo. And the most tantalizing is an association of the Igbo to the Hebrew race. This assumption is based on the fact that Igbo culture has many similar traditional customs like that of the Jews. Similar customs are observed in marriage negotiations, childbirth and circumcision, restitution, attitude to totem animals and taboos, as well as hospitality to others, especially to strangers, etc. The Ibu are therefore said to be the split and lost group or tribe of Israel that refused to wander further northeast with Moses, but preferred going down southward. The Igbo people have many Jewish traditions. Naomi Katz, the current Israeli ambassador in Nigeria, and others point to their possible ancient Israelite origins. See, the scholars, they've done their research on the Igbo tribe, extensive research. And they've compared the traditions of the Igbo tribe, and they've matched them up to the biblical traditions of the Israelites. And they said, whoa, these are strikingly similar. The only way that these people could be practicing the Hebraic faith this close is if they were the biblical Israelites themselves. So you may ask yourself, what is the significance of the Igbo tribe to the so-called Negro in the Americas? When you do the research, what you're going to find out is that the Igbo tribe is one of the main sought-out tribes that were captured and sold in the transatlantic slave trade and came right here to America. The British were the major buyers before they banned their own slave traffic in 1807. They were replaced by the Portuguese and the Spanish for as long as the traffic continued here. The majority of the captives were speakers of Igbo dialects.
You can hear me clearly, Rabbi. Let us have your name once more.
My name is Rabbi Yehuda Ben Shomer.
Okay. Well, is it okay if we just call you Yehuda?
Yeah, that's fine.
Today?
Okay, yeah, that's fine. No problem at all. I'll go on even further to say this, that the slave trade is actually connected to Deuteronomy 28, because the majority of the slaves that were brought to the Caribbean islands and brought to the Americas were Ibu people, were people of Hebrew and Hebraic Israelite descent, if you will. And so if you read Deuteronomy chapter 28, it matches perfectly what happened to the Hebrew slaves, the black Hebrew slaves, during the slave trade. It just matches it perfectly.
Back up now. I think we just rung a bell here. Hold up now.
Okay.
Hold up. Hold the presses.
Okay.
Hold up. I hope everyone is listening to this. This is you about to rock some boats now, Ben Yehuda there. Hold up now. Listen to what he's saying here. So you are saying that there's a great chance, or more so, that the black people that links directly to the slave trade are from the lost tribes of Israel. Is that what you're saying here, sir?
Yes, I am. Now, granted, I will qualify that I don't. Wait a second. I don't believe that every single black person is Hebraic or Jewish, but I'm saying that the majority of the slaves involved in the slave trade were Hebrews.
These people knew exactly who they were buying and selling, both the Africans and the Europeans. The Europeans, which are the Romans went after 70 AD, they went conquering, and they done hid themselves under different nationalities after they done conquered the native people that were in those lands in Europe. Hid themselves under the French, under the British, under the Portuguese. They're the same exact Romans. And all they're doing is continuing the agenda that was put in place in 70 AD. When they came down there looking for the Israelites. It's the same exact agenda. And carrying it forward to today. It's the same exact agenda. They knew exactly who they were aiming for. It's not by coincidence that all the history matches up perfectly with the Bible prophecies. It's not a coincidence. And then they push a doctrine on you in church talking about it doesn't matter. So then you never go and look for this information. Now you see exactly why they don't put none of this in black history, why they don't go prior to the 1600s. You start digging prior to the 1600s and then you find out you